Hi, everyone. It's Denise Brown from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Thanks so much for being here today. We're going to talk about healing the lifelong family rifts. This is a presentation that I started delivering probably about 13 years ago. And I was reviewing the presentation that I used to give. And I thought, boy, the world was a little simpler back then. And so today we're going to talk about how to manage healing a rift from three different perspectives. If you started a rift, if you got involved in a rift without doing anything, or if you're a witness to a rift. So let's talk about some statistics and then we'll go into a definition of what a rift is. When I first started delivering this presentation, it was really difficult to find statistics around how many family members and families are impacted by a rift. So the stats that I show on this slide are a little old, but I thought it would be still helpful for you to see. I think it's interesting that 1 in 40 are estranged from a family member. And then most recently, there were some studies that were done within the past few years. One that found that 10% of mothers are estranged from an adult child. And actually, my mom is one of those mothers. And then there was another study of undergrad and graduate students. And 40% of those who participated in this study have experienced family estrangement. So let's talk about what a rift is, because it's important for us to know what we're not talking about today. So there might be abusive situations, abusive relationships that do not, at any point in our life, want us to reconnect with that relationship. So we're not necessarily talking about abuse today. We're talking about something that's happened within the family that's caused a break. So in my family, we are going into the 4th generation of rifts, unfortunately. And I'll talk about the rifts on my dad's side. We've had some rifts on my mom's side, but we'll stick to one side today. And the rifts started with my grandmother, and then they continued. And now we actually have rifts that involve my nieces. And I think about those rifts as being misunderstandings, really hurt feelings, and not knowing what to do about those hurt feelings. And if you'd like, in the chat room, I'd love for you to share any experiences you've had with a family rift. It could be that you work with clients who talk about the family rift. It could be that you've experienced your own. So whatever you want to share in the chat room, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your experiences with a family rift. So in my family, it started with my grandmother, who I would say probably was mentally ill, undiagnosed, understandably, because of her age and when she was born. It was not something that was really talked about or that treatment options were available. And because of her mental health or lack thereof, she was a difficult mom for my dad and his brother, and oftentimes would really try to pit one brother against the other. So there was a rift between my father and my uncle for a period of time in our lives. The rift, though, with my grandmother impacted our holidays. So it was difficult to have a calm holiday if my grandmother was part of that celebration, because my dad just could not forgive her for the difficult childhood he had. And then in our family, the rift is with my older sister. And then we do have a relationship with one of her daughters, but we don't have a relationship with 2 others of her daughters. And so that has impacted our family tremendously and causes my mom a great deal of heartache. And I think it's important to think about the rifts from the 3 different perspectives that I had mentioned earlier. It could be that on a terrible day, you said or did something to another family member and that started a rift. It could be on a family member's terrible day, you received words or were part of an action that hurt you. And so you were impacted by the rift because it came at you. And then there's witnesses to the rifts. And I think about the younger generation as the witnesses. They may be impacted because the entire family doesn't get together for a celebration. Some people are invited, others aren't. Or there's just silence around relationships. So there's witnesses to the rifts who experience the hurt and the pain as well. So it seems like if someone had a bad day and said something that they shouldn't have, it would be easy to simply apologize and move on. And I think it doesn't happen. And so what I like to think about is what is it that stops that healing from happening? And I think oftentimes it's because we're looking to hold power within a relationship. So it could be that we believe we are right, and that puts us in a position of power within a relationship. It could be that we hold a grudge, and that feels like it keeps us in a position of power. And it also could be a way that we protect ourselves from further hurt. Years ago, Oprah Winfrey had a show about grudges, and she talked about a colleague who hurt her dearly. And she was shopping at one of our department stores here in Chicago, Marshall Fields. And it was a few years after the rift happened, and she saw her colleague on the escalator, happy as could be. And Oprah realized in that moment that the grudge that she held against that colleague was only hurting herself because her colleague was going about her life completely unaware that this grudge that Oprah held against her. So I think what happens is we perceive that we can hold power by believing we are right at all costs or holding a grudge, when in essence, we are holding on to, especially with a grudge, bitterness and resentment. And that makes our days harder. If we hold on to the bitterness, it just eats away at us. But boy, I'll tell you what, it is hard to forgive. If we've been hurt, if someone that we have trusted or truly loved has hurt us, it does sear our soul and it can be hard to move on. So forgiveness is such an easy word to say, but I think it's such a difficult action to take at times, especially because we worry that we will be hurt again. We're going to talk a little bit towards the end about what can we do if we engage again in a relationship where there was a rift, and how can we set ground rules going forward. And I think it's important to remember that we can empower ourselves with boundaries. If a rift has happened and we are the one who has been hurt by the rift, we can be different in the relationship. We don't have to be who we were when the rift happened. And I think about that particularly in the relationship that we have with my older sister. She is someone who I don't consider to be well. And so I will try to explain that to my mom. Every once in a while, my mom will still say, I don't understand what's wrong with her. And I'll say, well, I think she's not well. And if she were well, she would act differently. And that puts us in a place of compassion and thinking about my sister, which helps my mom. We had ups and downs with my sister over the years, and it really became a significant rift in 2015. My parents were both critically ill, and my sister really was MIA. And she wasn't acknowledging that she wasn't helping. Instead, she was really making it harder for us. She was accusing us of, well, anyway, it made it difficult. So over the years, when she has been erratic in her behavior, she has removed herself from the family. And then she'll come back, and we've always said, basically, good to see you. Here's another family celebration. Please come. So we've always welcomed her back after her erratic behavior. But after 2015, it was different because the hurt that my mom endured was really significant. So, in many ways, I think we worked through the situation to forgive my sister, but we have different ideas about welcoming her into the family. Just about a year ago, she wrote my mom a letter and said, I'd like to re engage and get together with you guys. And so we actually had a family meeting about it. And my mom was open to it. And my other siblings and I weren't. And we expressed our concern about what it would be like to have her a part of the fold. And we talked about how life is easier without her, which is really such a painful thing to say. But her erratic behavior added that dysfunction in the family get togethers that we didn't miss. So we haven't gotten together with her. Certainly, COVID-19 was part of that. But she and my mom will text every once in a while. And we've talked about what to do after my parents die. Will she be a part of the funeral, the memorial service? And I've also asked my parents, how do they want me to manage their moments of death? So when they die at home, fingers crossed, that's the goal. When they die at home, who do they want me to call? Because I think it's important that other family members have an opportunity to come and say their goodbye to the body. And they have said to me that they want my sister and all her children to be called and to have that opportunity to say goodbye. So I will respect that wish and I will be kind to my sister when I see her. But that doesn't mean that things will be different because we are different as a result of that relationship with her and what we've experienced and endured. Okay, so let's break down rift. And I think bottom line to a rift is fear. And that adds that tension in the relationship. It creates insecurity within the relationship. We don't trust the relationship because of the rift. And I also think oftentimes we regress in our behavior, even in our thought patterns. We become who we were. And that can add to the difficulty in healing the rift. And truly, it's pain that has caused the rift. And when I think about pain, I think about it as something that could be perceived. It also could be something that really happened. So, for instance, from the perspective of my sister, she perceives that we are out to minimize her place in the family, so to speak, that we are not respectful of her place in the family. I remember a time when I had connected with her. We were connected. It wasn't during an erratic time, although this is kind of a story about how erratic she could be. We were at her house. I was sitting with her and her family. We were having a meal. We were talking about something that was going on in the family. And I think it was that my mom and maybe my younger sister and I were getting together with a cousin. And she was very jealous about that and had a reaction to it. You know, what's wrong? Why can't I come? What's wrong? Why do you guys keep me out? And why do you not include me? And so I said to her, because I understood her perceived pain at that point, I said to her, you know, I tell mom and dad on a regular basis how grateful I am to them for giving me four wonderful, loving siblings. I love each and every one of you the same. I love you just as I love every other sibling that I have. And that helped her in that moment. It did not ultimately change her perception of her place in the family, but in that moment it helped. So her perception that we try to keep her out of the family is not actually what we would consider to be a real pain, but we respect, or I at least respected her in that moment, and her perception of the family unit. and where she belongs. What can happen is that we don't understand someone's perceived pain because they cannot articulate it to us. Or it could be that they are afraid of articulating it to us because we might judge it. What I also think is kind of interesting is pain that I consider to be real to me might be something that another person looks at it and says, well, you're just perceiving it that way. That's your interpretation of events. So I bring that out because sometimes it might not matter whether or not it's perceived or real. It only matters that someone's in pain and acting out of that pain. So if I were to break out what pain means, it's something that we take personally. I think pain is about anger as well. My dad was an angry parent. And so our experience with my dad when we were growing up was that he was mad. And we didn't understand that anger until I started having a relationship with my grandmother. So she had been in and out of our lives, and whenever she was in, it was anger and tears and just stomach aches. And then when she was 95, she was diagnosed with bladder cancer. And I thought, oh my gosh, time is limited. I need to understand her. So I started to visit her in the retirement community that she lived in. And another important fact in this story is that she was put on antidepressants, and it changed who she was. And I was able to have a relationship with her for the last 2.5 years of her life. And in that relationship, she told me stories about raising my dad and my brother, which allowed me to really gain an insight into my dad's anger. And so the anger that I perceived was at me, I then realized was really about his life circumstances. And that oftentimes the anger was really at himself. I watched this really interesting TED Talk a couple weeks ago about depression and anxiety. And it was a journalist who had done a lot of research and interviewing around what is it that causes depression and anxiety. And he really had this interesting insight about it, and that is it's our unmet needs. And when he said that, it makes perfect sense. And I think sometimes we're angry because we have unmet needs and we don't know where to go to get them met. And I think in my dad's situation, he was angry because his father left the family when he was 7. He and his brother and his mother had gone to a family event. They left his father at home thinking he's just going to stay at home. He'll be here when we get home. And when they arrived home from the family event, there was a note on the table that said, basically, I'm gone. And he never saw his father again. That unmet need of having a relationship with his father, answers to the questions, why did you leave? Why did you leave me? Why didn't you get in touch with me? I had such an insight about the anger that it wasn't about me. Now, of course, to grow up in that anger is very difficult and very painful. So when I was able to forgive my dad, I was able to forgive myself as well. Oftentimes we walk around in the world with this internal pain. There's that great phrase that says something like, be kind to others that you encounter in your day. You don't know the pain they are carrying. And I think that's so true. There's a great book called The 4 Agreements, and it's by Don Miguel Ruiz. And he talks about 4 agreements that we can really create with ourselves about how we interact in the world with others. And he talks about how we interact with people who have wounds we cannot see, and we might inadvertently touch a wound. And because we don't see the wounds we're touching, we can't understand the reactions that we're getting. But oftentimes people are reacting because of their hidden wounds internally, how they hurt. And I also think when we're in pain, we're naked. And when I used to talk about this, people would say, "What do you mean naked? What does that mean?" And I mean raw and vulnerable. And we don't like to be vulnerable, right? We like to appear stoic and in control. And vulnerability seems to put us on this path of being out of control. We're uncomfortable when we're vulnerable. We're uncomfortable with that pain. And I think that discomfort keeps us from trying to figure out how do we heal that pain. Okay, so as we think about rifts, I'd like you to give some thought about a rift you might have had in the family and thinking about if it started with you, if it included you, or if it affected you. When I used to do this presentation, it was actually an in-service for long-term care facilities. And it was a smaller group and it was in person. So we would have the opportunity to go around in a circle and people would tell me what rifts they've had in their family. And I remember this one gentleman who was part of one of the presentations. And at the beginning of the presentation, he said, "I don't have any rifts with anybody in my family. We're all good." And then as we started talking about rifts, he said, "Oh, I do have a rift. It's with my cousin, and he's not allowed in my house." So then we had a conversation about what it was that happened. And in essence, he was hurt by something that his cousin did. And instead of being able to talk about it with his cousin, he shut down the relationship. His cousin was no longer welcome in his home. The conversation about rifts, I think, sometimes does help us to see our relationships in a different way and think about whether or not there has been a rift that has impacted a relationship. And again, I really like to reiterate this that we are not talking about healing an abusive relationship. It's a relationship that for some reason has gone awry because of miscommunication or lack of communication. So as you think about a rift that's happened to you or within your family, think about what's the pain of that rift and think about what's the pain that may have started that rift. What's the pain that keeps the rift going? And then what's the healing that might be able to soothe the pain? Healing is powerful because it frees up our energy. I've been looking at resilience a lot these past few months, and it occurs to me that resilience is simply energy. And in order for us to bounce back from tough moments in our day or difficult weeks or difficult years, we need to have energy. And it's this idea about keeping ourselves fueled with good energy and minimizing our interactions with who and what steals our energy. And so healing is what helps us get that fuel to stay in a good place, to be productive and positive. So if we were to break down heal, I think of these 4 words. It keeps us healthy. It allows us to embrace what's possible. It's a way for us to be actualized as human beings. I think we find our better self through healing, and it's a way for us to love ourselves. When I think about healing, it is about ourselves. Perhaps it impacts a relationship in a really positive way, but ultimately it's about our own health, our own ability to embrace our own imperfections, to embrace our own vulnerability, to allow ourselves to have that rawness of the human experience without judging it or keeping it at bay. When we are actualized as human beings who are imperfect, we are allowed then or given the opportunity to create deep, meaningful relationships. We often talk about authentic people that we encounter in our day and how much we want to connect with someone who's authentic. When we allow ourselves this opportunity to heal, we are authentic because in that healing, we are honest about the pain. We forgive ourselves for what we said or did that we think, oh my gosh, that really was not my best. And it allows ourselves to love ourselves enough to be better. But I think about love too. Oftentimes people will say to me, well, you help your parents because you love them. And I like to reframe that to say, I help my parents because I love myself, because I know what gives me peace of mind. And that value of caregiving is what gives me peace of mind. I will also say, because of the healing I experienced with my grandmother, I had a different opportunity to create a different relationship with my father. I should also tell you that my grandmother did not want my parents to have 5 children. So she was really okay with the first 2. And then the bottom 3, I'm number 4, was really just, they were just a nuisance to her. She just couldn't understand why someone would want more than 2 in the world. So when we did have holidays with her, her focus was really on the first 2, my older sister, who we have the rifts with, and then my brother. And then she kind of would pay attention to the bottom 3, but she really didn't know our names. So for instance, one time she called me on my birthday, but she thought it was my sister's birthday. So my younger sister's birthday. So she was a little not really invested in us as individuals. So that was my experience with my grandmother when I was growing up. But then once I started to visit her after she turned 95 and had that cancer diagnosis, we developed a really nice relationship. And there was one time when I went to visit her and she was napping on her bed. And so I nudged her and I said, Grandma, it's Denise. And she opened her eyes and she smiled at me and she said, I was just dreaming of you and just hoping you would come to see me today. And I think about that opportunity. Oops, I apologize. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but here we go. I think of that opportunity to experience that with my grandmother was really quite powerful. So it changed the narrative about my relationship with my grandmother. So the story now that I think about my grandmother is not that she didn't really know my name when I was younger, it's that she was so deeply loving toward me when she was older. And that's the story that I carry about her. I have a few pieces of furniture in my apartment that she gave me, and I have a little suitcase too that she gave me. And I treasure these little items that I think represent starting over at any age. We can start over with family members at any age because she was 95 when we started over. So when I first used to give this presentation, this slide actually was different. It was everybody is doing their best. And when I would talk about that idea that everybody is just doing their best, I got a lot of pushback, understandably so. And it was a concept that I learned when I went through life coach training in 2004. And I used to really hold on to that belief that we are just doing the best that we can. But I've recently thought about that in a different way. It's about us doing the best we can because we are going to encounter people who are at their worst. But that doesn't mean we have to meet their worst with our worst. I think that's why our focus on our well-being means that we stay our best, regardless of what's the worst that we encounter with other people. And I find that to be freeing. So I learned this actually in my work. I used to do a large conference. I had volunteers that helped me, but for the most part, the responsibility for getting attendees and raising money and organizing the theme and the presenters fell on me. So it was this huge task. I believed in the premise of the conference, but I oftentimes would wonder why I was putting myself through it. Because what would happen is people would come at me with, you've got to make this opportunity the best thing that ever happened for me. And that became their worst because it felt like they were coming from a place of scarcity, fear that they were missing out on an opportunity that could change their life. So, for instance, many of the presenters had written a book, and they had this idea that the conference would turn their book into a New York Times bestseller, no matter how many times they would say that is not going to happen. That was their perception, this big opportunity that was going to change their life. So the pressure was, this better change my life. So then they would come at me with fear, you better change my life, which was too much for me. And I learned that if I had focused more on keeping myself in my best shape, I would have been able to meet their worst in a better way, in a better place. So if we think, for instance, about our holidays, now this year would have been a different way to celebrate, but typically in the past, you might have a large gathering of family members. Perhaps you're doing a lot of cooking, you're cleaning, you're buying presents, you're wrapping, you're trying to really turn a one-day event into this amazing holiday that's just like in the Hallmark movies. So there's all this pressure, and the pressure takes away us at our best because stress does not create best. And I think about those holidays as really feeding into rifts because someone had a perception of what should happen during the holiday. I should get the best gift ever. People should really, give me great gifts. If I don't get what I want for Christmas, it's going to be a disaster. If I'm not appreciated for what I do for this family around this holiday, it's a disaster for me. One of our certified caregiving consultants, Danelle LeBlanc, told me this really great story about how she used to look at family events. And she would say, on Mother's Day, I would be looking for the parade. Why aren't they throwing me a parade? I'm this great mother. Look what I do for them every day. Look how I am for them every day, meaning her two children. Where's my parade? And so when the parade didn't happen, this big event that celebrated how great she is as a mother on Mother's Day, it was a disaster. And so her reaction, her response then to Mother's Day was, this is the worst day of my life. And you can see how that feeds into the rifts, right? So if we take care of ourselves around the holidays, then perhaps we can meet the worst behavior having been our best. And when I think about on our worst holidays, if my dad had somehow received the support he needed around his unmet needs, he would have had a different perception of my grandmother. And that perception would have been, she's not well. So whatever she says, whatever she does is coming from a place of someone who is not well. I cannot take it personally. It is not about me. So I'm not going to let it spoil the day. And that would have been how he stayed his best and met the worst. And then the holidays would have been different for everyone, including him, because I'm sure he has regrets around his anger. And I think ultimately, when we can get through life with just a few regrets, we've had a successful life. And that requires us to be at our best, to take care of ourselves, to be honest about the needs that we have, and look to ways that we ourselves can meet our unmet needs. Okay, so let's talk about some tips depending on what role you might have in a rift. So let's say it's a rift because of something I've done. I showed up to a family event. I was mad about what I didn't get for Christmas, and so I let everybody know. And then maybe my siblings stopped talking to me because they're like, that is way out of line. So what I can do is recognize the pain. I didn't get what I wanted for Christmas, so I felt unloved. The pain was I didn't feel loved. And I can forgive myself for having that pain because I can recognize I can love myself. So then I can reach out to my siblings and say, I did not manage that holiday well. I was angry and I'm embarrassed about that. I'd like to manage those situations better in the future. I wonder what suggestions you might have about how I can communicate when I'm feeling unloved. And then let them tell me. And then I can say, that's really helpful. I'm going to do better. Thank you so much for this opportunity to move forward. Okay. And then if it's a situation where I am the target, so there's a rift that's happened and someone is saying and accusing me of something or angry at me because they have an unmet need that I haven't met, but I didn't know I was supposed to meet it. The challenge for me here when I'm included in a rift, but I didn't start it, is to let go of the why. And this is a hard one because if you've been a target, you probably don't know why. And it drives you nuts because you might say, you know what? I've been so supportive and helpful, been an amazing sibling or friend. Why would she do that? Why would she say that about me? The why keeps you in pain. If you can let go of the why, which again is hard, you can move into, okay, I don't know why that happened, but I do know this person is important to me and I want to fix this. So I'm going to reach out. It could be that the person who started the rift reaches out to you. And instead of saying, why did that happen? Which takes you into the past and keeps you into pain. Another question to ask could be something like, how can we prevent this going forward? So then you're moving into, let's kind of start again, but we're going to start again in a different way. And then expressing the gratitude. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for reaching out. You could be the mediator. You could be the one in the family that takes the role of keeping the peace and being the peacemaker. It could be because there's an important event in the family coming up and you think, you know, enough of this silliness. We're going to all get together and we're just going to celebrate this wedding or this important event. So if you're the mediator, some suggestions about what you can say to both parties, the one that started it and the one that was impacted by the rift. And it could be, it's important to me that the entire family gets together. I understand something painful has occurred. How can we all move forward? And then it might be that you have to weed through the, well, you know, she did that. If you stick to how can we all move forward, you can redirect that conversation to, okay, I get something painful happened in the past. I want us to all move forward because I value our family getting together to celebrate this event. How can we move forward? And it could be that they say, well, I just don't want to sit at the same table. Okay, great, that's fine. Thank you so much for working this out with me. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. Okay, now it sounds like these are really simple things to happen, right? Like I just gave you some words and all of a sudden everything is going to be okay and it's magical. And that's not the reality, right? Because we know that we're imperfect people and sometimes it takes people a while to work through the pain. So it's important to remember that it's a process. That if you reach out, for instance, as the mediator and you feel like, wow, that did not go anywhere. No, that's okay for now. That you've done the best you can and you move on to just take care of yourself. So because this is a process, Allow time. It could be that when you first reach out to someone, they are still in too much pain to think about moving forward. But you reaching out helps the healing start. In addition, there could be stops and starts. So it could be one family event seems to go okay, and then it just all falls apart at the next one. Bad moments will happen. It's part of the process. Think about being part of ongoing forgiveness. It's also important to think about what are the ground rules going forward. And I think about this, especially during our really difficult political climate, that it just could be that you and cousin Frank don't talk politics anymore. Maybe you were both on different sides, and years ago it used to be fun to banter, and now you think it is not fun. And you can just say, we're going to agree to disagree, and I'm not going to get involved in a conversation about politics with you anymore, Frank. I also think that we can embrace the differences. People have different viewpoints, they have different ways that they live their life. And as long as they aren't out hurting people, the differences can really add an amazing flavor to your family. So, for instance, my brother's wife is from Belize. So she is a woman of color. Now, when they married, my grandmother was furious. She refused to go to the wedding. Well, we didn't care. And we did not care. She is different from us, and she adds a flavor, spice to our bland Irish upbringing that is marvelous. It's amazing. So the difference is what keeps our family alive in many ways. So it could be that who you thought, for instance, your sibling is not who they are. They are someone different than you perceived they should be. Embrace the difference. We communicate with respect. That could be your ground rule. And so when someone says something that you think, wow, that's so disrespectful, you can say, you know what? In our family, we communicate with respect. So I'm stopping that. I'm shutting down that conversation. And then you can just excuse yourself. I'm not a part of that conversation. I, I've been reading a lot about people who have different political viewpoints and in many ways embrace what could be considered really out of bounds. So they are conspiracy theory believers. And I read one insight that I thought was helpful, and that is sometimes, I'm going to use sometimes because I hate to use the blanket statement of everyone who believes in conspiracy theories. So sometimes people who believe in conspiracy theories know they're wrong. And so the author of this particular article talked about a neighbor she had who was racist, and she knew it. And so she tried to really minimize her encounters with him. But she had an encounter with him, and he said something that was racist. And her response to him was, you know you're wrong. I know you're wrong. And that was it. I thought that was so helpful to know that you can just tell someone, I know that you know you're wrong, that belief is wrong. Because we get tongue tied. We think, gosh, I can't believe someone is saying something like that to me. And again, it can be as simple, I know that you know you're wrong. And leave it at that. Okay. So just a couple more slides and then I'll open it up for any questions or thoughts or experiences that you guys would like to share. So thinking about healing, what does that look like to you? Is it that you spend some time journaling or praying or meditating? How does healing enter your heart? And it could be that you keep your heart open for a family member who you have an estranged relationship to come back to you. So healing could be that you are open to opportunities. In one of our presentations years ago, I had a mom whose adult son had stopped talking to her after she divorced his father. And she would write to him. She would send him cards on his birthday or any special event. She said, "Should I still do that? He doesn't respond." And I said, "Absolutely. Write to him. Let him know that you think of him and love him. He's in his process. And those letters and cards that you share will help him in his process." So that could be what healing looks like to you. Just keeping that open heart that a strange relationship will someday, at some point, heal. I think the drama is what can contribute to the rifts. And again, thinking about the holidays and the pressure that we put ourselves under. So dance away from the drama. Dr. Phil had this really great thought that I heard him say years ago that I've always thought about, and that is that we can love our family members through their difficult moments. And sometimes we do that from a distance. So I think about that with my sister. I love her through her difficult moments, but I do that from a distance because I feel like it's just too difficult and too unhealthy to be close. But I still love her through her difficult moments. Okay, and there's my contact information. And I just wanted to mention again that if you're interested in our November archive of our Healing Before the Holidays event, go to healingourway.com. And if you're interested in submitting a presentation for our April event, where we talk about our resilient spirit, then you can go to caringourway.com. Okay, and I'll open it up if anybody would like to share any thoughts or experiences. Feel free to unmute yourself. Actually, I'm going to ask Kathy to unmute herself because before we started today's presentation, I asked Kathy, I put her on the spot. I said, "Are there rifts in your family?" And she said yes, but she heard from someone.
I did.
So how did that person contact you?
Well, first, I just want to say that in the chat, someone had commented that Laura, whose name I can't see, had commented that I think dementia within the family can cause rifts because of how everyone thinks the person should be cared for, or because of how we all cope with that fear and suffering. And that was what caused the rift, really, in our family, was disagreement over how my mom should be cared for. So, actually, I think I realized that I reached out first because it's my younger brother, and he had a milestone birthday. And I thought, what a shame is it that he has this milestone birthday and nobody in his family is reaching out to him. So I sent him a gift card. And then he wrote back and said, thank you. And then, strangely enough, he and my husband work for the same company, but in different locations, which was something actually neither of them was aware of because we're not in contact. So then my brother reached out and contacted me about something that had happened at work that he wanted to talk to me about, that, he thought I might have some insight into. So, it was the first conversation that we've had in years, but it's interesting that, suddenly we have this common ground, whereas the common ground before was my mother and we didn't agree on that. So now we have this other common ground that we can talk about. So we haven't talked since, although I gather my husband just talked to him. So it's interesting that, he's reaching out. He's having a health crisis too. So I think, that may be influencing all of that.
Circumstances change, which change our perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that might change how we perceive a rift and might turn into a call to action. What I find challenging about rifts is there's so many reasons why they happen, and there's so many dynamics to it. But I wanted today to at least start to think about what we can do, that we don't have to be powerless to the rifts.
Denise, I had a question.
Oh, sure. Yes.
So, my husband comes from a split family. Mother-in-law has her 2 kids, father-in-law has his 2 kids, and money is the issue. And so when it comes to the will, my father-in-law passes away, it goes to my mother-in-law, something happens to my mother-in-law, it goes to my father-in-law, and then it gets split. Well, my mother-in-law doesn't split things fairly anyway. So if something happens, and so there's this huge rift, and the rift that I'm trying to at least help calm my husband down. I'm just like, just don't expect any money, because there's a chance if you get anything, then be happy. But he's just very, very upset about this whole thing, and you can't control someone else. So what they do with their money is their decision, not yours.
So there's an interpretation that your husband is making. And what's that interpretation around that situation? Because it's not about the money, it's the interpretation of the situation.
So then it's in my head, I'm seeing it that he's picking his wife over his children.
Yes.
Which, as a child, he's often felt neglected, and her kids came first. And I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent, because I'm blessed to still have my parents and they've been married 60 some years. So it's difficult for me to relate, but I'm trying to at least help him get through this, because he's not going to change them. So forgive and move on and enjoy the time you have with your father. But that's not going over too well.
Right. So there's a skill that I teach in our consultant training, which is called validation, which speaks to understanding how someone feels, and it provides that context. So these aren't exactly the right words for your husband. It's something like, it's so unfair that someone who doesn't do as much as you do is getting more than what you'll get. That must hurt. And again, those aren't exactly the right words, but you can hear where I'm going. It's the acknowledgement of his pain, and that he has every reason to feel hurt. Because sometimes he's in a process, and the process isn't ready to move him into forgiveness, because he has to feel heard around the pain, that he feels unloved, and that hurts. And he has every right to feel that pain. Oftentimes when we feel understood, it then helps us move out of the pain. But until that pain is heard, we stay in that pain, and we become something like a broken record, because we wonder, why can't people hear the pain? Someone tell me that the pain makes sense. So if there's some way you can use words to acknowledge that he has every reason to be hurt, that can help.
Thank you. I will give that a shot.
Okay. Does that sound possible to you?
Oh, absolutely. And maybe if I talk to his brother as well and see if I can get his brother on board, that will help, because the 2 of them together have been through a whole lot. And if his brother can get through this, I know my husband can too.
Yeah. Again, I think we all walk around with this interpretation of feeling unloved. And then there's evidence that we are unloved. And sometimes that evidence takes the form of money. Someone got more money than I did, so they are more loved than I am, or more important, or more valuable.
Well, in his family also, when they give gifts, they tend to give monetary gifts, they don't give you the hugs or like my family does. Mine will give you time, not, money. And his gives money, not time. So
okay, there you go.
It all comes back to the value. But he lost his mom when he was little. So it's those separation things, when you start peeling that onion, he's just got a whole heck of a lot going on there.
Yeah.
So, but I will do what I can to help him. And that's why I chose to listen here, is because I figure I certainly could use help in trying to figure this out. And being someone who doesn't know the situation, an innocent new person can't help but hurt, but help us get through this.
And I would also say that phrase that I started to take back, I would say, is absolutely appropriate in your husband's situation, and that is he really and truly is doing his best.
Yes.
He really and truly is trying to navigate a very painful situation, and he's doing his best as he does that.
Yes. So thank you. And I do need to commend him on that.
Yes, there you go. Okay, right. Yes. Yeah, because you'll see him in a loving way,
Mhm.
and that will help him.
Yes. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And Roberta is bringing something up in the chat room that, oh my gosh, I think, she writes, I had a family rift and the quarantine isolation has complicated healing that rift. Political rifts with the isolation can escalate as well. And I think we are just trying to navigate so much newness that I think we have to kind of give ourselves a little bit of a break. That if it's not possible to heal the rift right now, the possibility is that rift can heal when the time is right. So again, it's this idea of keeping that open heart to the healing when the time is right, when circumstances change. And I think the conversations about politics can also really add to the rifts. And again, it's just deciding what conversations will I participate in. And if it's a conversation about politics that I know I'm not going to agree with the other person, then it's just not a conversation I can have.
Denise?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I just
Yeah,
wanted
go ahead,
to-
Laura.
Yeah. So I wanted to add something to the money aspect because I actually work with long distance daughters of dementia because I was one myself. And so money is a huge issue in families. I mean, with dementia, I mean, everything. So I think that, and we all sort of know this, you know, like subconsciously, but I think it's important to remember that especially when Denise is talking about unseen wounds, and how we in our society look to money as happiness, right? So if we didn't have any happiness in our lives, then, oh my God, money, I'll finally be happy, right? And that's why there's so many rifts in families and so many hurt feelings because that money represents happiness. And like, I see this in my husband's family all the time. And I just wanted to speak to, because I know, I'm sure a lot of us have experienced this too, like rifts in our in-laws families, or there's these huge fights and you see that they're very dysfunctional and you're like, oh my gosh, and you haven't been in that family all your life. So you're just like, whoa, and they know that you're saying, whoa, and then they feel judged, right? So, and I had this, so I've been with my husband for maybe about like 3.5 years now. And they are an angry family, and I know why. It helped me to find out why, because then I'm not suffering as much. But there was a particular instance where one of his sisters just like started yelling at me because she had perceived that I had hurt her. And it was because they were all helping his parents move out of their apartment. And there's 7 of them or 10 of them, right? In a small apartment. And I'm like, I'm just going to stay out of the way, and they interpreted that as she doesn't care. She's not helping us do things. She doesn't love this family. So then his sister just started screaming at me in front of everybody, by the way. And, I didn't say anything because I know in his family, it's if you fight back, like that's where all the hurt comes from. That's what they're used to with the pattern. So I was just quiet, and then his mom said something to, set the boundary basically to her. But afterwards, his dad sent me this very angry email about how, he didn't know what my parents were thinking when they raised me. I was extremely rude, all of that stuff. And it took me a while to like process this email and, and I did respond, but the way my intention was compassion, right? Because I knew that he was coming from a hurt place. My husband's sister was coming from a hurt place. And so when I responded, I did what Denise talked about, which was kind of like setting boundaries, but I did it in a loving way. I understand that you say this, I was brought up to this. I think there may be a misunderstanding or miscommunication here. I apologize, if that was something that I did, it was not my intention. And so he responded back, was still kind of angry, was like, I don't think it's a misunderstanding, blah, blah, blah. But after that happened, it stopped the pattern, right? It stopped this pattern of conflict and anger and like, oh, there's a different way to do this, right? And so it's funny because my husband is now noticing that like his sister's interactions with his dad is better, like his dad's interaction with me is better. And I think like a lot of what it focuses on when you're setting that boundary, just make sure that your intention is compassion and love. Because if it's anger, if it's resentment, if it's hurt, then that's what's going to come out in your words. And people, people don't remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel, right? So I just wanted to mention those two things.
Okay, thanks, Laura. And I know that we are at our time, so I want to thank everybody so much for joining us today. We meet again tomorrow, and then Thursday and Friday. The archive will be available on Monday, and I so appreciate everybody being here and sharing your experiences, and I truly hope this was helpful. Okay, thanks, everybody.